Good evening, Jeanette, Liv, and Chiara.
Hello.
Hello.
Hello, good evening. For those of you at home who are wondering, Chiara is a student at Durham University who we thought could be an interesting person to talk to, and she is in fact using a photograph as her avatar on Skype this evening. She's not just frozen solid. But we are here this evening, you lovely people, and also you lovely people at home, to talk a little bit about, I suppose, something which I was looking at a little while ago, and that was the so-called Museum of the World digital project, but from the British Museum, like a partnership with Google, and its implications for the future of museums. Now, initially, I get quite excited because I'm thinking, cool, yeah, this is public access. It's the ability to bring all this information to people where they are, and it may well take a little bit of pressure off the funding black hole sometimes which museums face when trying to put together, for example, exhibits and also exciting public initiatives which people have to physically visit. Do you guys agree with that, or are there some downsides to this?
Well, I always get excited when it's digital exhibitions, for the same reasons, and because I'm a nerd. But I actually think that the only downside is the workload can be put on the collection side of the museum to make it all accessible and digitally available, because it's not always up to date, and there's always a lot of stuff to process. But we have a lot of these initiatives, especially in Sweden. I talked about one of them yesterday for the news.
Yeah. The abbreviation is KOK. I'm not going to say it out loud, but but yeah, the sort of the Wikimedia initiative. Yeah, absolutely. And you're right. There is a certain in digitizing these things, there's the assumption that there will be parity in the knowledge which is surrounding certain artifacts, and also the ability to actually record them and sufficiently archive them, and so on and so forth. Absolutely. I mean, for example, I know that actually the archives, I won't say which archives, but some archives near to where I'm living, because I don't want to embarrass them, they have a huge backlog in terms of processed material, and it's only getting bigger because funding is low and stuff is being found or donated all the time. So that's definitely true. Any other thoughts at all?
So I think they're great. I mean, I think making information that is in museums accessible to a wider audience, and making it sort of immersive in a way, and making allowing people to be able to engage with it through technology is great. The biggest problem for me, which is just sort of an ongoing issue, I don't know how to resolve it, is the issue of digital preservation. And technology changes constantly. People and I feel like websites like these are great, but they're also very temporary, because you essentially have to continually update and keep that information cataloged and keep it going, forever. And as technology changes, that becomes very, very difficult or impossible. I mean, we have this problem now where we've lost tons of digital material from the 80s, 90s, like just VHS tapes, for example, that were never turned into digital files. Now they're falling apart, or even older digital files that no one can read anymore because they don't have the proper software.
Or indeed, actually, that by virtue of the way that these things work, in order to maintain some sort of economic control, often you have inbuilt, not so much, I suppose, inbuilt falling apart of the technology, but certainly inbuilt barriers. So, for example, to really properly use often these sites, such as this British Museum one, you have to have a Flash plugin. Now, it's free to download, but That said, though, it is a proprietary technology. It's a piece of code which only they own, and it could be very easily be lost in the not too distant future. Yeah, definitely. And actually, I mean, laser discs. That's a biggie. There was a little while ago. I did a video where I highlighted that there was was it 1986, I think. There was an attempt to sort of digitize the 1066 Doomsday. Well, 1066 onwards Doomsday project, and it was fascinating. It was a great big project, and it had the backing of the BBC, and but now it was almost unreadable. It was almost completely lost because suddenly we found ourselves in a time when we had these giant discs and nothing could read them, and so yeah, that is definitely a huge problem. But actually, I'm reminded that by virtue of the presence of you three in different ways. Actually, there's another problem, and that is access. Anyone, so long as they can physically somehow get there, and you can save up for a bus if you have to. You can walk into a museum, but if you're in an area where you don't have very good internet, and that's the only way that one can actually access this information, then you're kind of stuck. I mean, Chiara, there, part of the problem is your internet this evening. And you were saying actually that you had some trouble loading this particular website that we were looking at.
Yeah, well, I've not only loaded it today, so a couple of times in the past, and it actually never took less than 6 minutes. And what I feel about is actually also compatibility with other systems, because I'm now using a Windows machine, but I haven't thought about how Linux actually is able to process all these data, and whether it would work the same or not. And well, I don't know how internet is in other countries, but I also thought it's a bit like to show the exhibition also of the former British Empire to people who are now not, well, lots of stuff has been collected during that time, and it certainly is more of other origins, and I think lots of people in more rural environments couldn't even access the site at all. At least to the experiences of this network here.
Well, and I can definitely vouch for the fact that, I mean, Liv finds this hilarious because she's in a country where they have like crazy mad good internet, but in the UK it is very variable. I mean, where I grew up in North Wales, famously very patchy internet, and this actually we could end up, if museums go down the route of essentially digitizing their collections and having the physical building be more or less a giant archive which feeds the digital online presence. If we go down that route, we could end up with this sort of, I suppose, multi-tiered levels of access. You could have people who don't have much, well, either don't have much money in order to access the internet properly, or people who live in rural areas being somehow deprived of access to stuff which, almost by its virtue, should be accessible in a museum. So by the virtue of being in a museum, should be accessible. There's one more thing as well that occurs to me, just sort of off the top of my head, and that is, I suppose, the origin and the roots of this word museum. Part of the joy of a museum is the ability to actually go in and muse, is to sit around looking at things, maybe not actually know everything that's in the museum, or know all the information, or have someone in your ear, for example, saying, this particular sock was knitted by so and so, and you're actually able to almost imagine what it is that you're looking at. And do you think that there's a potential for losing the power of the museum in digitizing this sort of stuff?
I'm skeptical.
Yeah.
Because that could be because of my internet addiction, but the muse part can absolutely be found in a digital museum as well. It's the famous Wikipedia effect. You can go from anywhere in the ones that we have in Sweden, where they're more like picture archives, that where you can go from picture to picture and kind of lose yourself in the wealth of information that's there. And I also think that it's important to, I don't think that digital museums and stuff like that should, well, erase the museums as they are today, but they're a great complement to museums as there are today. Because you can also get a grip of what you want to see in a museum if you go and look at it.
Jeanette, you seem to want to say something there?
there's, I mean, maybe I'm romanticizing museums, or I just love museums, but to me, there's just something about interacting with physical objects in a space and being like really close to, an actual tangible thing, rather than having it sort of be mediated through a screen. But practically speaking, I don't think it's necessary. Like for educational purposes, I think a well-designed, museum via technology or on the internet can be just as effective. But I guess in my mind, I've always seen sort of digital as more of a supplement to outdated museum. So another problem with like museums is that a lot of them aren't updated. And they're sort of very lost in the time that the collection was originally curated, and there I think really is where I think technology can become important, right? So like let's say you don't have the money to completely renovate a space, but you can install tablets that connect to a website or that connect to some kind of thing you can explore that helps update that material.
And actually, speaking of which, I guess there's another side to that. I mean, you're describing the carrots, but I guess the stick side of it could be actually that the wave of potential with digital possibilities means that there's really no excuse for having that type of museum as well, for having an outdated, dry, dusty area, when it is relatively inexpensive compared to, say, remodeling a whole building. So yeah, there's definitely, I suppose, there's a double-edged side to that, certainly in terms of the potential. But I think in terms of, I think I'm with you on the nostalgia almost of being able to. I mean, for me, a really good museum is one where you have a room and there's a bench in the middle, and maybe if you're really lucky, it's the type of place where you're allowed to have a sandwich. You can sit there, there's a nibbling on your sandwich, looking at something. And maybe I'm thinking about art galleries as well, and I do enjoy that. I do. I mean, there's. Well, not that you can have sandwiches there, but there's a museum in County Durham, not too far from where I am, called the Bowes Museum, and it's famous for this silver swan. Once every day, they have this sort of clockwork automaton display of this swan. It's a beautiful thing. If you ever get a chance, you really should go and see it, people, and also you guys. But part of the brilliance of the space is that actually you go in with, for example, last time I was there with Mrs. Soup and also the in-laws. You go in with all these people, and then you split up and you're moving around the space. And sometimes you bump into someone that you know, and all the while you're going, oh, have you seen this? Have you seen that? Have you? It's immersive in a way which I fear digital technology might not be immersive, and which isn't quite the experience which can be offered by a building. I mean, what do you think, Chiara? Do you have any thoughts on this argument about, or this question about being in the museum?
Well, I think actually that this digital museum is maybe just a response to our digital world, and that, well, when I've been lately to the British Museum, I haven't seen any teenagers basically there, just little children with their parents. And I think people would probably today, or in that age where computer technology is so far, well, if they're not like directly interested in archaeology, they might maybe rather go and just watch it online, because you don't have to pay for anything, you just can go inside. I personally value the museum a lot, because I always have to think about all this data that's in there, and of course all the maybe outdated descriptions, well, they're still printed out, they cannot fail anyone, because my experience with technology is when you need it the most, it will fail. And I've seen so much badly maintained electricity and technology in museums. I would probably rather fear that most of the tablets would have, I don't know, no power or whatever reasons why they're not working. So, I don't know, I value just going into a museum, but, well, I think that's because I think also archaeologists like just museums and just tend to go there more often.
Yeah, I wouldn't say that we are unbiased to the museum or artifacts in this group.
Indeed, it almost sounds like you can just meet archaeologists in the corners of museums. Well, actually, you pick up on something. There's something I'd just like to sort of draw out a little bit more there, and this idea you were sort of hinting, Chiara, at this notion that one should go, if one was a museum, one should go to where the muses are. One should go to where these people are, and if in particular young minds like teenagers just before they're entering their careers or whatever, that key formative moment in their life, if they're not coming to the museum, then there is a powerful argument to be said that actually the museum should be going to them, because to a certain extent that I suppose that was one of the driving forces behind especially the tradition, for example in Britain, of free museums, which started up not that long ago, but long enough that basically when I was a child, was this idea that actually museums are important for your roundedness as a human being. And so I think there's something there, in so much as we should possibly be doing everything we can to find people where they are, go to where they are, take the mountain to Muhammad, as it were. Jeanette, you seem to want to say something just then,
Well, yeah, it was a little bit off topic. I was just thinking about the sort of more political side of this. So I guess this would be more a benefit to sort of having digital collections as opposed to real collections, right? Because there are a lot of politics involved with museum ownership and provenance and where objects actually belong. Like when you walk into the British Museum, there are a lot of objects there that other countries want back.
Yeah.
And
undoubtedly.
And you're sort of taking objects and putting them all together and taking them out of their original context. Whereas I think, if you have sort of an online thing, you can see objects sort of preserved through images and sort of seen in their actual context and provided with more context, and then potentially it might make it easier to return that object, maybe.
Are we trying our best not to say what this object might be? The main one, the main one. No. And actually, the not that I mean to keep on referring back to videos this evening, but a couple of years ago we did a video on Archaeo-Chat about the Elgin Marbles, or the Parthenon Marbles, and actually pretty much once a week maybe, on that video, because I'm a Brit, I get some abuse thrown at me, sort of saying, they were stolen, give them back, this kind of thing. And the funny thing is, actually, I'm actually quite sympathetic to the argument that they should be returned. I don't understand why people get so caught up in the idea that somehow they belong in the British Museum, and especially, actually, as you say, if there is now the possibility to separate where something is from what something is. So what we can do, we can understand what it is without having to actually go there. It's a very powerful tool in that sense. So why not fully digitise them, then give them back? Now there's all sorts of political arguments, all sorts of other things going on around that, which I suppose isn't worth really going into. That's a whole video on its own, a whole other conversation. Yeah, but I think what is interesting, you mentioned the legal side. In the case of the British Museum, and in the case of I'm assuming this, many other museums, especially national ones, or for example, perhaps things like ones in New York, for example, famous museums. There's a very strong legal underpinning for the stuff being there. So in Britain, for example, in the British Museum, I'm fairly sure that basically there's an Act of Parliament that says stuff in the British Museum is irrevocably the British Museum's property. I can only leave that space with the British government's permission. So in some ways it has been completely overtly politicised, and the what you might call the parochial rights and wrongs of ownership in the face of these legal pens which have been put up around our artefacts. That's a very, very intimidating space to find oneself, especially when one's talking about this sort of stuff. And so perhaps actually, one of the great potentials of this sort of type of museum, this approach to museum, is to actually be able to liberate artifacts from these pens, and maybe actually start to tackle some of this, dare I say it, colonialist legal gump that we've wrapped lots of these artifacts up in.
And also,
So go on.
if I can just put in that we have technology nowadays that makes it easier to. I mean, there are digital alternatives that make these kind of things, and also exhibitions possible to be more interactive with the object himself, with 3D scanning and printing and stuff like that. So, I mean, replicas are a known fact in museums, and now we can make humongous replicas with 3D printing.
Well, actually, speaking of which, I mean, I don't want us to go down this road in terms of conversation, but actually, that also applies to human remains, actually, as well. I think the argument now, there's a huge ongoing argument at the moment in the museums world as to whether or not actually we need to have any human remains on display at all ever, given that now we can scan and 3D print them to such a high quality. Frankly, I was in Durham University not that long ago. Couple of weeks ago, and I saw one of the 3D printers that they have, and now not only can they 3D print, but also they can, as they're printing, colour it in a way which is, you don't even have to have someone who individually paints the thing afterwards. It can print out basically what it looks like, and so yeah, that's a very powerful point actually. So maybe actually that's a halfway house. Maybe we've reached a good halfway house here, and that is digitize when you can, 3D print when you can, and perhaps leave or perhaps free up some of these more complicated issues to be resolved in ways other than having to have the physical thing in a physical space, maybe.
But I think especially for bones, well, wrong person to talk about bones and that such, but it's a bit like I think a lot of people's religious concerns are not resolved by the fact that you make a 3D print of a bone, which for me example would be an entirely different object because it's just a 3D copy. But I think for a lot, well, these 3D copies look really real to people who have no ideas about human bone. But on the other side, I've experienced some people who then actually feel tricked because it looks too real. But they don't want any real bones in the museum either. So I think the human bone issue is something that's...
Yeah,
human remains will always be an issue because people will always be fussy about it.
Oh wow! People always be fussy about it. Oh well, those fussy people.
It comes down to this
discussion very clear.
The issue of authenticity, right? There's not just with human remains. Like I think any museum object, people. I mean, there are anthropologists who have been trying to figure this out for decades. But it just sort of how people engage with material culture and why, and how people, give value to certain objects. And you can have an exact replica of something, but because it's not the original, because it's not authentic, that sort of becomes insulting almost. And, why is that? And is that something that we can overcome? Is that something we want to overcome? It's something that's part of being human, I guess, in a lot of societies.
Actually, I think we should possibly bring this evening's conversation to a close. But it feels like actually we could talk about two things in the near future. One of them being human remains in museums, and another one being the Parthenon marbles. And maybe we should actually, those could be some really interesting chats to have. But actually, I'm reminded, and I think Jeanette will appreciate this particular metaphor, or this particular memory. I'm reminded of a moment in Star Trek First Contact, when Picard and Data are looking at this rocket ship, and Picard has to touch it. And Data's like, why are you touching it? What does that do? Does that make that more real for you? And without thinking about it, Picard goes, absolutely, yeah, definitely. I've read about this since I was a boy. I've seen pictures of it. He's in the future, so undoubtedly he's probably seen 3D printing of these things or whatever, holograms. But touch, physically being there, is something which is so important to people. And maybe this is this is absolutely at the heart of really what we've been talking about this evening, and well worth revisiting in the near future. On that note, guys, I'd invite you guys at home to comment below. Also, feel free to comment on, obviously, what if you think the other issues that we discussed this evening warrant another video. Then please feel free to invite us to make those videos. Which one would you want to see first? Human remains or the Parthenon marbles? Fight! But
Or
crucially,
a video about authenticity, maybe.
oh, authenticity as well. Authenticity, precisely. So definitely comment below on that, as it were. Vote on which one you want to see. But also, just we'd love to see this conversation continue. So definitely continue in the comment section below, and maybe we'll have to return to this in the not too distant future as well. But this is getting on to be quite a long video. So anyway, guys, thank you so much as ever for your time, and well, I suppose bye bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye. And for you guys at home, as ever, until next time, do take care. Bye bye.